A couple of years ago, I was obsessed with the game of operation. Couldn't wait to take my turn, to pull out the tiny little plastic organs with the tiny little tweezers. Jumping every time the buzzer signaled my failure, or pumping my fist in triumph when the wishbone or broken heart clear those metallic snares. But when a real surgeon in the real world removes an organ, the fate of the patient is a bit more fragile and without the fun bonus of a flashing red nose. The first successful kidney transplant was performed in 1954, and since then, medical advances have led to more successful transplants and an increase in demand. Let's set up our operation game board with the complex history of kidney transplant surgery and carefully tweeze out the advances that have led to safer procedures, and finally set off that buzzer with the seedy underbelly of the illegal organ trade. According to the UNOS, the United Network for Organ Sharing, that first successful kidney transplant in 1954 led to successful transplants of the liver, heart, and lung. And in 1984, the nonprofit UNOS was born for the purpose of saving lives through uniting and supporting the efforts of donation and transplantation professionals. Federal rules provide a regulatory framework for the structure and operation of the OPT, or Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network. Dr. Jean Melville Williams, the founding president of the UNOS, was a transplant pioneer and towering force in the development of the transplant system in the United States. And by 2017, the number of network donors topped 10,000 for the first time. The OPT network reports that researchers experimented with organ transplantation on animals and humans in the 18th century, and that there were many failures prior to 1954. Even after that, patients ran the risk of organ rejection as the body's immune system attacked the new organ like a foreign object. Now, many transplants are considered routine medical treatment, and rejection can be treated by reducing the immune system's response with medication, according to a University of Virginia Health Center report in 2019. With that said, let's carefully maneuver those tiny tweezers over some important medical breakthroughs, such as tissue typing and immunosuppressant drugs that began to allow for more organ transplants and a longer survival rate for recipients. And as medical technology improves and more donors become available, the number of people who live longer and healthier lives continues to increase. Findings published in Science Immunology on June 29, 2017, have since become useful in creating better donor-recipient matches and developing new ways to prevent rejection of transplanted tissues. Co-author Fadir Lakees, Chair of Transplantation Biology at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, wrote, "For the first time, we have an insight into the earliest steps that start the rejection response. Interrupting this first recognition of foreign tissues by the innate immune system would disrupt the rejection process at its earliest inception stage and could prevent the transplant from failing." A study released by the Cedars-Sinai transplantation staff on February 16, 2019, found that an enzyme derived from strep throat bacteria could kill organ-attacking antibodies immediately and improve kidney transplant outcomes. Yet, according to Dr. Stanley Jordan, medical director of kidney transplantation at Cedars-Sinai, most patients wait more than 10 years for a kidney that is a match because of the shortage of healthy donated organs. Yet, still, highly sensitive patients come to Cedars-Sinai from all over the world, specifically because of the work of Dr. Jordan and his staff, and their increased capability to help them. Dr. Irene Kim writes, Without desensitization drugs like those in Dr. Jordan's toolkit, sensitized patients sometimes wait 20 to 30 years for a kidney that is a match. For patients who desperately need a transplant, his work has been life-saving. It is exciting to be involved in a program that has not given up hope. While the UNOS and the OPT network work to find and match donors to those in need of a transplant, and transplant surgeons develop ways to increase safety for transplant patients and decrease the threat of rejection, others set off the buzzer of dread in the murky underbelly of the illegal organ trade. On the podcast, The Conversation, British researcher Greg Morlock shared his journey, which began when he joined a Facebook group about organ donation. Within 2 days of joining, he received a message from a man in India offering to sell him a kidney. It should surprise no one, Morlock said. That payment for organ donation is often associated with the coercion and exploitation of those in poverty. The commercialism of transplant involves the buying and selling of human organs and is recognized as a serious crime in the vast majority of countries. But to some of the most impoverished people in the world, greedy handlers will offer horribly insignificant amounts of money for the removal and sale of their organs. In India, Pakistan, Egypt, Iran, Nepal, and more, destitute and desperate people willingly undergo this horror for what little cash they can get. The most troubling cases involve people being trafficked so their organs can be removed. Victims held against their will and forced to undergo medical tests are ultimately operated on without their consent. While this hasn't been seen as a significant phenomenon in England or the United States, the problem of transplant tourism, according to Morlock, is. The global reach of social media has made it increasingly easy for Americans and other first world countries to connect with people dealing in black market organs, which then sees patients traveling abroad for a transplant that they might not be able to obtain legally or as quickly. BigThink.com and Global Justice News also report that organs purchased are not always from reputable sources. And NBC News reported the findings on June 18, 2019, that China had been forcefully harvesting organs from detainees in prison camps for marginalized groups, sometimes while people were still alive. In order to support the more than $1 billion per year illegal organ trade in China, more than 1.5 million people were killed. And in India, this kidnapped child's eyes were harvested so his captors can make a profit. Lindsay Wagner writes for Global Justice News. Given that lawbreakers rarely report their own crimes, an accurate picture is difficult to ascertain. But it's estimated that 5 to 10% of worldwide organ transplants involve illegal payment, and that nearly 400 British and 1,300 American patients received transplants abroad between 2008 and 2019. On one hand, we may ask why anyone would take such a risk, but on the other, as of September 2020, 123,175 Americans were on a waiting list for legal, life-saving organ transplants. And in an average year, while approximately 180,000 kidney transplants are performed, 5,000 people die waiting. While not as simple as this classic game, we've operated our way through the history of kidney transplant surgery and the careful research and development that have led to its safety and success. Then hit the buzzing snare of the inevitable dark side, found when people tried to rig the game. I think I'll leave the world of transplant surgery now to the experts and just return to more innocent ways. Maybe I'll take my operation game, go home and teach my little brother and sister how to remove these tiny little plastic organs with these tiny little tweezers.